That's me, Kevin. I successfully implemented Appsmith internally here at the agency. Hey buddy, we just got a new ticket from the project manager. It seems that we got all tags missing description. Don't look at me, buddy. You are the one who wanted to use Appsmith to reduce technical debt. I'm just here to estimate some tasks, buddy. He's front-end. He can be really cocky, but he's a nice guy. Still not convinced about Appsmith, but we'll get there. Yeah, but it's for the main front website which you developed. Again, man, not my problem. Hey, here comes the PM. Hey devs, Kevin, frontend. Oh yeah, that's project manager. He thinks 9 women can deliver a baby in 1 month, but he get pics of Ross. I just added a new ticket to this sprint. Now, I know it's not ideal, but we owe it to the stakeholders and this should have been working already. Yep, we saw it, but shouldn't marketing or the client enter the description manually for each tag? I mean, that's why we built the app for it. Well, there are tons of tags created each day. We can expect them to do that themselves. Can't you just do some magic of that thing that you do writing code and make it work? I can buy some pizza for tonight. What did I tell you? Yeah, tell your Appsmith magician to fix it. Alright, let me figure something out and I'll let you know. So you need the help from the master. That's backend. He hasn't bought clothes in years with the swag he gets from conferences. I'm kidding, man. What did you need? So the PM shows open a new ticket about the tag description being empty on hundreds of them in the database. I'm not sure I can help you with that. I just built the backend APIs. No, I get it, but how hard is for you to create a couple of API endpoints? One to get the tags with no descriptions and the other one to update a single tag description in the database. You surely can. I definitely can, and don't call me Shirley. Yeah, PM, create a ticket for me, and Kevin, I'll send you the documentation as soon as it's done. So what I'm going to use is Appsmith Workflows to get the tag with no description and then use Appsmith AI to generate a description for each tag. Then update the database with the AI generated description using the Patch API. Finally, we're going to use a cron job every day to update all of the descriptions during the night so no one has to worry ever again about this. Easy peasy. If you use AI and automation for this, the stakeholders will love you. Alright, here we are in Appsmith Enterprise Edition and let's build exactly what we promised, backend, frontend, and the project manager. So the first thing you will notice is that the create new button is no longer a button, it's actually a drop-down because you can create not only applications in Appsmith, but also reusable packages and workflows. So let's select the workflows. And you will notice that this is very familiar because it looks like creating an application, but we don't have an UI builder, and it makes sense because workflows are meant to be run behind the scenes. So we still have the JavaScript objects, the data sources, the API queries, and so on. So the first thing is, while the backend is building the APIs that we need, we're going to create the AI portion, which is the way to create a tag description using Appsmith AI. So let's go to the data section and let's bring our first data source and let's find Appsmith AI. Appsmith AI is the easiest way to implement AI on your applications without the need for API keys or training a model. Everything, we do it for you. If you want to learn more about Appsmith AI, I suggest that you go to the Appsmith AI playlist that we have on our YouTube channel because that's that way you can learn more, but you will notice how easy it is to use this. All right, let's give it a name to our Appsmith AI data source. I'm going to call it generate tag description. Very self-explanatory, right? And let's click save. Now that we have our data source, let's go to the queries section and let's create a new generate tag description query. Now I'm going to call it the same way, generate tag description, so it's easier for me to understand what this is about. And now, what action do we want Appsmith AI to do for us? For me, I wanted to generate text, but again, go to the Appsmith AI playlist and you will learn how to use classification, summarization, image extraction, and everything else that Appsmith AI has for you. And now let's build our prompt. Remember, I want Appsmith AI to generate a tag description for me. So that's exactly what I'm going to be asking. I'm going to be saying, hey, you are in charge of the community portal for Appsmith, the best low-code developer-first open-source platform to build enterprise internal applications. You need to update the different tags for the portal content, so please create an 80-word description for the following tag. And here we're using the Appsmith parameter mechanism to pass the parameter of the tag that I want it to create a description for me. Because remember, we're going to be bringing all of the tags from the API, using Appsmith AI to generate a description and write it back to the server via the API. And that's it. That's pretty much what we need to do in order to use Appsmith AI. So it looks like I just got a message from backend. Let's see what he says. Hey Kevin, I'm out for lunch, but I just sent you the API documentation you asked me for. That should be published already. Let me know how you do. I don't know how you're gonna do that. That sounds crazy. But yeah, let me know. And hey, thank you for the Appsmith t-shirt. I was running out of t-shirts already. See you, man. All right, thank you so much, backend, for the API. So let's open that in a new tab and let's review the documentation together. So this is what we ask. We ask for a GET request to get all of the tags with no description, and also a request to patch a single tag with the new description that we created. So that's exactly what we ask, which is perfect. So let's do the first one first. Let's copy this GET request, go back to Appsmith and create a new blank API request. And let's put that URL that we just got from the documentation and run it. And as easy as it is, we got a response back from the API. And as you can see, it's an array of objects, and each object is a tag that has no description, as you can see. Also comes with a UUID, which is the ID in the database for this tag, and the tag name is stored in the name property. Now remember this, because we're going to be using these properties to call the API and pass this as parameters. So that's it. Let's give it a name. I'm going to call this get tags with no descriptions. Again, very self-explanatory and easy for us to understand what the API does. So let's go to the other patch request. What we can notice about this one is, first, we need to pass a tag ID as a parameter. And second, we need to pass an API key. Now in Appsmith, when you need to pass API keys or any type of secret or sensitive information, we recommend that you use a data source, not a standalone request, because Appsmith is going to manage the authentication and the security for you. So let's do that. Let's go to data, create a new data source, and find authenticated API. That's the one that we need. So let's click authenticated API, and we need to push first the base URL for our API. So if we notice, for both endpoints, the base URL is community.appsmith.com/API. So that's what we're going to be using. Let's put that over there, and then we have here the header section. Now, I don't want to pass the API as a plain text header. Remember, I mentioned that Appsmith has authentication built in for us in a much secure way. So let's select that. We have basic, OAuth2, API key, barrier tokens, etc. So let's select API key. Now we need to pass the key name for our API key. And as you can see here on the API documentation is API key. So let's copy that, API-key. Let's put it over there, and now the value for our API key. So I'm going to paste that in here. This value is going to be encrypted and no longer retrievable. And where do we want to add it? Yes, to the header, and no header prefix whatsoever. And finally, let's give it a name. I'm going to call it community API, or community data source. There you go. And let's click save. And that's all we need to do. Now we can use this data source to build a patch request. So let's go back to the editor, click on the plus icon and select community data source query, which is the one that we just created. And as you can see, Appsmith is going to pre-fill some information for us. For example, the base URL and the authentication header for us. So let's build this API query. Remember, it's a patch request. As we can see on the documentation, it's a patch request. And then let's copy the other portion of the URL, /taxonomy/tags and the parameter. All right, so let's put that over here. That's exactly what we need. And the other thing we need to do is send the body request, where we're going to be telling this endpoint, please patch this tag here. So let me put this over here and let's review it together as well. We need to pass a data object first of all, we're going to be telling the API, or the API is expecting, hey, what are you modifying here? In this case, we're modifying tags. All right, which tag are you modifying? We're going to be passing a parameter with the tag ID. All right, what are you changing for that tag? I'm changing the attribute called description, and here I'm passing that as a parameter once again. So this patch request, as you can see, is going to be expecting two parameters, the tag ID and the description. So that's exactly what we need. Perfect. And the last thing is the header. As you can see on the documentation, it's telling us that, hey, we need a content type, not application JSON, but application vnd.api plus JSON. It's a different type of content type header, so we need to pass that. So let's do that. Let's copy the content type, go to the request header, and you will see that Appsmith uses application JSON as the default header. But as soon as you write content type, it's going to be overwritten by what exactly we want. Perfect. So let's copy this, application BND plus JSON, and there you go. So that's exactly what we need. It looks like the patch request is looking pretty good. Finally, let's give it a name. I'm going to call it update tag. Pretty straightforward. And it looks like we have what we need. We have a way to get all of the tags with no description, a way to generate a description with Appsmith AI, and a way to patch a single tag with a description that we just created. So it looks like we are ready to start writing JavaScript code for the logic for our workflow. So let's do that. All right, so in this main JavaScript function is where we're going to write the custom logic for our workflow. And that it doesn't mean that you cannot have more JavaScript objects and logic and separate everything in files, but the main important portion is that you have an execute workflow method, which is what Appsmith Workflows is going to be executing once we call this workflow. And there is this data parameter. This is how you can pass data to this workflow via the HTTP execution or via another Appsmith app calling this workflow. So you can pass parameters, and then you can use those parameters for the business logic on your workflow. Now, in my particular case, I don't need to pass any parameters because everything that I need is going to be coming from the APIs and from Appsmith AI. So it makes sense that I'm not going to be using that data parameter, but I did want to explain what it is. Now, here's my code. It's very simple. What? 18 lines of code with the console.logs. So it's fairly straightforward. First, we call get tags with no description. Again, we're using the wrong method, and we're going to store that in the tags variable using await because we are on a async function. So we're going to await for the response back from the API, store that on a variable, and then log it. And then for each of the elements in the array coming from that API, we're going to be iterating through them using a for a statement. We're going to log each of the tags that we're going to be working with in the for statement. And then we're going to call Appsmith AI to generate a tag with no description using the drawn method. Remember, we have to pass a parameter, what the term is going to be. So how do we get the terms? From the tags array in the I position of the statement in the for loop, that name. How do we know its name? Well, remember that the API request returns a JSON array, and each element has a parameter, a property called name. So that's how we know it's going to be name. So Appsmith AI generates a description. We store it on this variable here, and now we log it. And lastly, the last portion is calling the patch API. Again, passing two parameters. The first one is the tag ID. How do we know is the UUID? Again, if we go back to the response from the API, you see that the ID of each tag is stored in the UUID property. And then the description, where do we grab the description? Well, is the one that Appsmith AI generated. So we have to pass that from this variable here called AI description, that response, because that's the property where Appsmith AI stores the response from the Appsmith AI service. And lastly, we also log that, and that's it. As you can see, it's very simple to achieve this now that we have the APIs integrated and all of that stuff. So now we can run this workflow. Let's test it out. You have to deploy your changes before you can do that. And every time you do make changes, remember to deploy them. So now let's run it. And as I said, you can basically pass, oh, it's running right now. You can pass test values to the execute function. But in this case, remember that I said that I'm not going to be really passing any data. But if you need to test the function and pass some test data, here's where you can do it. Now I'm passing an empty object because I don't really need to pass any data. So now let's see what the execution logs are. First thing is we call get tags with no description, and here we have the array. Then we call generate tags description that run, and we are passing the term here as a parameter. For this particular case is QR code, and Appsmith AI is going to return back a description. Here it is. This is the description for that particular tag, and as you can see, it's coming on a response property. So that's why we're calling response on the code. Lastly, update tag that run, as you can see, is passing the tag ID and the description from Appsmith AI. Perfect. And last but not least, we see the JSON API, which is the API that's storing this on the backend, saying, yes, I store the QR code tag with this description right here. So it means that it worked perfectly, and so on with all of the logs that we have here. Because remember, we were on a for statement for each of the elements on the array. It's doing the same procedure, calling Appsmith AI, storing, calling Appsmith AI, storing, and so on and so forth. So now let's build the cron job. Remember, we wanted to run this every day at midnight, so we have to forget about the tags with no description. So let's do that. So right now, Appsmith Workflows, which is in beta, doesn't have any built-in cron job functionality, but once it goes publicly available, it will have a cron job functionality. So for now, we have to use any of the available systems out there. There are plenty of tools to build cron jobs. I'm going to be using Google Cloud Scheduler, fairly easy to use. So I'm going to create a job. I'm going to call it Appsmith. The region doesn't matter. And then the frequency, in this case, I wanted to run it every day at midnight. So I'm just going to be telling this is going to be the frequency. And as you can see, it's telling us it's going to be running it at midnight plus 1 second. That's fine. The time zone for me really doesn't matter. I can pick any time zone. Let's just pick here Central Standard European Time. That's fine for me. And let's click continue. Now the execution type is going to be HTTP request. The method is going to be post, and then the URL. How do we know what URL we're going to be using for this workflow? It's very easy. Go back to your workflow, click on settings, and there you will see the option to enable the webhook trigger. So once you enable that, you will see this URL, which you need to copy because you won't be able to retrieve this back again in the future because it has a certain key here, which is sensitive. So make sure to store it correctly, okay? I'm going to put it here, and I don't need to pass any headers or any body for this request because remember, I don't need to pass any parameters, but if you do need to pass parameters, you will have to set up in the cron job. So let's click continue. And lastly, what the retrieve config is going to be. I'm just going to leave it as default for this testing right here. And it's going to be storing. Now, how do we know when this executes, like what happens? Because we were able to see the logs because we manually run it, but how do we know what happens when this executes via a webhook trigger, for example? That's why we have this run history here. So I just have one because I tested it out, but there's going to be another one once we trigger our webhook. So that's what I wanted to show you. Right now, this trigger that we built has not run yet because it runs at midnight, but we can run it manually. You know, we can force a run. So that's what I just did. I just told Google Cloud Scheduler, hey, please run this workflow, even though it's not midnight. So we will see that in a second once that it checks success. Oh, here it is, it checked success. So we will be able to go back to the workflow, to the run history, and see what happened. So let me just refresh here. Click on run history. Let me expand this, and now we got a new one. Remember, we just had one. Now we have this one, and as you can see, we got a new set of tags from the API. This is a new set of tags, and is running the generate tag with no description. Is going to be calling the update tag. So everything went perfectly. It means that we're done. We can now send this to the project manager and the stakeholders. We can now call frontend and backend and explain to them, yes, we just did what we explained. And it took us like, what, 20 minutes? That's really amazing. So what are the next steps for you? I want you to sign up for the workflow beta. Click on the link in the description to start testing and try now this option. You can sign up for be a beta user at no cost. Also, subscribe to our YouTube channel. There you will see the self-hosting guide, so you can run Appsmith Enterprise on any of your infrastructure. Doesn't matter if it is Google Cloud, Azure, AWS, even your own bare metal server, that's fine. You can run Appsmith on any infrastructure out there. So I recommend you to download Appsmith Enterprise Edition, try the free trial, and also start using Workflows Beta by subscribing to our beta program. So that's it. See you on the next one, and subscribe to our YouTube channel.